The monsoon weather was still enveloping North Vietnam, making some targets impossible to hit at the time specified in Washington. Air commanders had no authority to improvise. The main burden of the U.S. Air Force's war against North Vietnam would fall on a single aircraft type. The F-105 Thunder Chief was originally designed as a supersonic long-range nuclear bomber. The single-seater could carry up to 5 tons of bombs, more than a World War II flying fortress. As a fighter escort and for light attack, the Air Force had the F-100 Super Sabre. The F-100 could carry almost 4 tons of bombs. It was also armed with air-to-air missiles and 4 20mm cannons. For bombing missions, the U.S. Navy still relied heavily on the propeller-driven Sky Raider. Although the aircraft had been in service more than 20 years and was very slow, it could carry a heavy load of bombs and rockets. It also had astonishing endurance and was able to stay over a target area for hours at a time. As Rolling Thunder developed, the Sky Raider would be gradually replaced in the Navy's attack squadrons by the A-4 Skyhawk. The Skyhawk could carry 4 tons of bombs, but it was a slow aircraft, able to reach only 670 miles per hour. Skyhawk raids were usually escorted by Crusader fighters, armed with both cannon and air-to-air missiles. By April 1965, the Americans' most versatile aircraft was already deployed in Southeast Asia by Air Force, Navy, and Marine units. The F-4 Phantom was a big aircraft and was able to fly at more than twice the speed of sound, 1,400 miles per hour. It could also carry a bomb load of up to 8 tons. As Phantom units took on a bigger role in the war against North Vietnam, one unforeseen shortcoming would soon emerge. The F-4 had been designed to depend for self-defense on its missiles. It had never been fitted with cannon for close-range air combat. Every aircraft deployed by an Air Force fighter wing or U.S. Navy carrier depended on more than 30 men to keep it flying. A carrier had a crew of around 4,000 crammed into the ship alongside planes, bombs, and stores. Because the carrier was operating 24 hours a day, the men worked in shifts up to 16 hours long. In Thailand and South Vietnam, conditions for Air Force personnel were easier. All the same, heat and humidity took a heavy toll on men and machines. To add to the burden, higher command often measured the success of a unit by the sheer number of sorties it could fly. Whether Navy or Air Force, morale was high amongst the air crew who were going into combat over North Vietnam. Aircraft and pilots had been lost, and the enemy's air defenses were still being developed. Washington had ordered that only confirmed military targets could be hit, and then never in civilian areas. Enemy aircraft had to be identified visually before they could be attacked, in case they were Chinese. And there was a host of other restrictions. Such rules had never been part of the training of U.S. pilots. But crew were left in no doubt that infringements would lead to serious disciplinary action. The North Vietnamese armed forces fielded 400,000 men in 13 regular divisions. All divisions had their own anti-aircraft guns. So did the units operating in Laos, building and running the Ho Chi Minh Trail. The Navy played a role in air defense too. Its fleet of East German gunboats was stationed on the sea and river approaches to important targets. From its beginnings, the North Vietnamese Air Force was part of the army. As well as its planes and a small number of helicopters, the Air Force controlled the Anti-Aircraft Command, a specialized anti-aircraft artillery formation. It also controlled an increasingly sophisticated early warning radar system supplied by the Soviet Union and China. North Vietnam's only fighter wing, the 921st, was based at Noi Bai Airfield, 40 kilometers from Hanoi. A second wing, the 923rd, was planned for the airfield being built at Kep. There was also a training wing and a wing of Ilyushin bombers at Cat Bai and Phuoc Yen. The anti-aircraft gun batteries of the Air Defense Force were organized into 4 brigades, concentrated around areas of strategic importance. The main road and rail junctions, the industrial centers around Hanoi and Haiphong, and the main supply routes to Laos and the south were most heavily defended. Anti-aircraft units were also deployed along the irrigation system of the Red River Valley. Although North Vietnam's air defenses were still weak, they would soon become amongst the most formidable ever assembled anywhere. The plan was to coordinate the efforts of radar sites and observation posts, anti-aircraft guns, and the fighter interceptors. The planes would try to ambush the enemy, and if they couldn't shoot him down, at least force him to fly through heavy ground fire. In the early days of the air battle, close cooperation between radar, guns, and fighters would not be easy to achieve. There were too many different anti-aircraft commands. Soon, as Soviet-built anti-aircraft missiles became operational, another ingredient would be added to the already complex system. For a long time to come, North Vietnamese pilots would run a very high risk of being shot down by friendly fire. The mainstay of the North Vietnamese Air Force was the MiG-17 jet fighter. It was an aging design, a top speed of only 710 miles an hour, and it was later replaced by the incomparable MiG-21. Yet the MiG-17 was still a formidable interceptor. It was one of the most maneuverable jets ever built, and armed with 3 cannon, it was deadly in a dogfight. By now, the Air Defense Force had a large number of Soviet and Chinese anti-aircraft guns. At the start of the battle, they were still simple types with optical sights. The 23 and the 37mm twins could fire 100 rounds a minute from each barrel, but could only reach targets up to 10,000 feet. The bigger 57mm anti-aircraft guns had a ceiling of 18,000 feet. American pilots could avoid them by flying higher, but in the last moments of an attack, aircraft had to come in low. It was then that the 57mm was an extremely dangerous weapon. The North Vietnamese regional militia now had 500,000 members and was equipped with large numbers of light machine guns. Against low-flying planes, they could be highly effective. Militia were even taught to use their rifles against enemy raiders, as even a chance hit by a single bullet could bring down a $1 million aircraft in flames. The advanced weaponry supplied by the Soviet Union and China depended completely on skilled personnel to operate and maintain it. North Vietnam was an agricultural country with little industry. 200 North Vietnamese Air Force technicians had been trained in China, but it was barely enough. There was also a shortage of skilled radar operators. From the start of the American attacks, the pilots of the 921st Fighter Wing had been keen to get into combat. They had been training at a furious pace. Gunnery was given the highest priority. Pilots practice opening fire at ranges down to 150 meters to get a kill on the first pass. All the time, the emphasis was on close-in engagements to make the most of the MiG-17's agility. At the same time, the Air Force was training the next batch of pilots as fast as it possibly could. Most of the training of pilots, radar operators, and anti-aircraft gunners was being carried out by Soviet and Chinese military experts. Many had already taken part in combat operations, actually directing the defense. At a higher level, behind the scenes, there were Soviet and Chinese staff officers working to improve the performance of every branch of the North Vietnamese armed forces. For the Americans, the first stage in stepping up the campaign against North Vietnam was to weaken its defenses. In the last week of March 1965, U.S. attack planes from the carriers Hancock and Coral Sea hit key North Vietnamese radar sites. There was a fierce reaction from northern anti-aircraft guns, and several U.S. planes were shot down. As the Rolling Thunder campaign built up, the attacks did boost the confidence of the South Vietnamese government. Government forces were doing better on the battlefield, too. Even so, in Washington, the mood was bleak. On March 29, 1965, NLF guerrillas launched a daring bomb attack on the American embassy in Saigon. 2 Americans and 20 South Vietnamese were killed. To many in Washington, the attack seemed to underline the need for much stronger measures to be taken in Vietnam. By now, President Johnson himself was pushing for vigorous action. He gave permission for the Marines already in Vietnam to be used in combat operations. Few doubted that more troop deployments would follow. Soon, U.S. aircraft would be faced with 2 missions in Southeast Asia: the continuing campaign against North Vietnam and supporting U.S. troops in a sharply escalating ground war.